Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to today's segment of Truths Applied. I know Pastor is normally the one that does this, but since I was preaching the sermon this last Sunday, we decided I would follow up with the application today. So appreciate you jumping in and walking through this with me. I didn't anticipate it going into this Sunday, but it seems like several of you after the sermon had mentioned the illustration about the recliner. And so I'm definitely glad that worked out that way. And I may have even had a challenge from my wife when I kicked my feet up in the recliner back at home, but we'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I'm glad that stuck with you, and I'm praying that we as believers, as Christians, that we don't get too comfy in our recliners. And so to help you this week to lower your leg rest and to get your feet on the floor and get going, I just wanted to follow up with a few practical steps that we could take, even starting right off today. But the conclusion that we came to on Sunday as we worked through the message and, was where do we go from here? We were looking in Acts chapter 1, verses 6 through 11, and the response of the disciples as Christ ascended up into heaven. And everything that happened there. We're not going to go through that. If you didn't have a chance to catch Sunday's sermon, I would encourage you, before even going on further with this, to stop and to pick that one up and then to come back into this. But so we looked at the response, and we even ended up in Matthew 28 a little bit as far as the idea of making disciples. We were encouraged to pick up the command that Christ had given us. And we saw that was to make disciples. And even in the passage in Acts chapter 1, he was saying that they, when he was talking to the disciples, but something we can even take to us, is that they would be his witnesses. They would be his messengers. And the same thing for us. Christ has that expectation that we will be his messengers. And so we are to make disciples. Now, the term even make disciples, it has, many different facets, because a lot of times we tie that to evangelism, and we think that it's just, to unbelievers. The making disciples is just sharing the gospel, and that definitely is an aspect of it. But even within make disciples, it carries both meanings, the idea of our interaction with unbelievers, but then also with believers. And even in Matthew 28, on the command here, and maybe I'll just go ahead and read that real quick, but 19 through 20, it says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So even in there, we've got, yes, make disciples, and that's the main focus. And with that, you've got both. That's going to be interaction with unbelievers and as well with believers. But also following that, you've got the baptizing and the teaching them to observe Christ's commands. And so those two things are also included in that passage when we think about this idea of making disciples. So don't get so focused on just the evangelizing, but the making disciples is something, and this could be a whole other thing that, starts with an unbeliever and works throughout their life as they become a believer and continuing on. And so that being said, for you today, I've got kind of two different ways that we're going to approach it. One is an application for something that you can do with another believer, and then two would be an application for something that you can do with an unbeliever. So first off, for something that you can do, and again, even starting right away today with the fellow believer, very simple, but just choose someone from the church. I would encourage you to focus on our church here, but really any believer. And if you're listening in, you're from another church, choose someone from your church. But whatever it is, you're choosing another believer and you're calling them, or FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, whatever it is. But you're reaching out to them where there's interaction. I would encourage you for it to be more than just a text message or, on the Messenger app or, whatever other things, but something where you're verbally communicating with them. And then to share with them something that God has been teaching you. So you giving from your life, here's what God has been teaching me either today or this week, something that's been recent in your life. Then asking them, what is something that you can pray about for them? What's a struggle that they've got or something that's on their mind, something you can pray about for them. And then the third thing with this is pray with them. Even though I know it's weird to pray with someone on the phone or through Zoom or Skype or whatever it is, it's just it's goofy, but that's where we're at now. But to actually pray with them, don't just do that. I'm going to pray for you, and even if you follow up with it, that's great. And I'm not saying that it doesn't count if they don't hear you. But what an encouragement that can be for you to be able to talk to them, audibly, and for them to hear you and you to hear them, for you to share what God is doing in your life, for you to ask, what's going on in their life, what you can pray for, and then to actually just pray with them, to take a few minutes and just pray with them. So that's the first thing that I would challenge you with, to whether you do it right now today or, sometime this week. But what a great way as a part of making disciples is encouraging and building one another up. So again, it's not just the evangelizing and the sharing the gospel, but it's sharing life together with one another. And even though we have to do it from a distance right now, we still can practice that. So that's your application with a fellow believer. With an unbeliever, this one, it might get a little bit more tricky, but look for an inroad with a neighbor. I figure we'll focus on a neighbor because we all have them. If you live out in the country, maybe they're farther away, but we have neighbors. We all have them. So look for an inroad, an opportunity with a neighbor. And like I said, you may have to be a little bit more creative here, just with the way things are, with people being on edge and things. We want to respect that. But it doesn't mean that we have to barricade our doors and shell up inside and not let anyone see us or anything like that. Just because there's social distancing that we do need to do and practice, it doesn't mean that we can't still make inroads with our neighbors. So that's my challenge here, is to find an inroad, and just a couple of little options as far as how you could do that. I've been seeing chalk getting used more than ever recently. And so just little ways that maybe you can connect through sidewalk chalk, on your sidewalk or around you, different things there. Just simple walks around the neighborhood. You would be surprised if you haven't already seen it, but it seems like a lot of people are taking walks, probably because they're like, I have to get out of the house. But whatever it is, they're outside, they're in their yard, and now it's spring, and people want to be outside. We don't want to be cooped up inside. So taking a walk around your neighborhood, and from 6 feet, still keeping those distance, still respecting what's going on in the neighborhood today, but in respecting other people. But from 6 feet, we can still make contact with our neighbors as they're outside and whatever they might be doing. And I'm talking more than just waving at them as you walk by, but using the opportunities, because this pandemic, it is priming some people for the gospel. And I'm seeing that happening. So let's take advantage of the opportunities. So you got the sidewalk chalk, however you might want to do that, just a simple walk around the neighborhood. This may be a little bit more specific for some people, for some groups, but Facebook groups in the neighborhood. And the reason I bring that one up is because it's something that started in my neighborhood, not by me. So I can't take credit for being like, this is such a good idea because I did it. Someone else in our neighborhood actually started this up. But we've got a Facebook group for our neighborhood, and there's a bunch of people in there. And it has opened up some doors, and it has given us opportunities to connect with our neighbors that we haven't had before. And even just the other day, I was talking with one of them, again, from 6 feet, we had the distance there, but because of the Facebook group and starting that initial connection, I was able to talk with one of them when we were on our walk, and they made the comment something about, when this is all over, we need to all get together, talking about our Facebook group. And I'm like, man, the door is wide open right there, and I didn't even do anything for it. But some of these simple things, and again, you get creative, but look for an inroad with a neighbor. How can we make some contacts during this crazy time that might allow for a friendship, for a relationship, maybe now, maybe when the pandemic is over, but that can then lead to an opportunity to just share the truth of the gospel with someone in our neighborhood. So those are the two things. The first is the call, or however you're going to verbally communicate with one of your fellow believers, someone in our church, to touch base with them and encourage them. And then two is that you're looking for an inroad, some form of contact with a neighbor, with someone in your neighborhood there. So hopefully you have some ways, and maybe you've got some creative ways of how you're already doing it or how you want to do it. Share it with us. Let me know. Put it out there so that some of the rest of us can be able to learn from what you're experiencing as well. There's so many different ways we can do it, and however you get started with these applications, or whatever you follow up with starting today and on, let's just make sure that we at least get started. We're not just sitting in the recliner with our legs up, but let's get to it. So put your leg rest down, get your feet on the floor, and let's get at it this week.